Hello everyone, this is Nakwe from Birds of Play, and welcome back to Finalating Fan Transy, better known as Translating Final Fantasy. A series where we take a look at some differences between the Japanese and the English versions of Final Fantasy games in order to better understand the subtle and sometimes less subtle nuances between the two. In this video, we will be taking a look at Wakka's farewell message from Final Fantasy X, but not only how it might differ between the Japanese and the English versions of the game, since we will also be taking a look at how both versions might be misinterpreting what Wakka actually wrote on the wall. So the backstory is that before devoting himself completely to becoming Yuna's guardian and aiding her on her pilgrimage to defeat Sin, Wakka feels like he first needs to say goodbye to his career as a Blitzball player. And what better way to say goodbye than to take part in one last tournament, maybe even emerging victorious depending on whether the player has truly mastered the sport of Blitzball, which might actually be a tall order for first-time players. Regardless of the outcome, however, Wakka leaves one last message behind in the locker room, handwritten in Spear and Script, the everyday alphabet of Spira. Spear and Script, and by extension Wakka's writing on the wall, is fairly legible to an audience that is familiar with the Roman alphabet. However, since it can still be hard to read, both the Japanese and the English versions of Final Fantasy X opted to also feature subtitles for the scene. The problem is that neither the Japanese nor the English subtitles seem to adequately convey Wakka's last message, which might actually be fine seeing as Wakka doesn't seem to take his retirement all that seriously, Wakka being one of the many athletes the player can recruit to play Blitzball later in the game. For those of us, however, that want to savor Wakka's message, a message that he wrote at such a pivotal moment in his life, analyzing the way it has been portrayed differently might nevertheless be of interest. So, starting with the actual writing on the wall, can you read it? If you want to give it a go, you can always pause the video, and if you end up not actually being able to read it, or having difficulty doing so, you might start to feel a fair bit of sympathy for the people responsible for the subtitles. But here's what it says. To the dreams of my childhood, farewell, Captain Wakka, Besaid Aurochs. Which was subtitled in the Japanese version as Shounen no Koro no Omoide, and strangely into English, considering that the line is already in English as My best memories are here. We can see that there's quite a bit of variety in regard to Wakka's message. But why is that? And how do these variations differ from one another? Again, starting with the writing on the wall, this version most likely presents the most complete version of Wakka's message, as he bids farewell to his youthful ambitions of playing Blitzball. The Japanese version is then in all likelihood based off of this original line, seeing as it builds on the same underlying concept of communicating with the past. The Japanese line, however, differs in that the message to the past is not explicitly stated, meaning it's not clear what the message actually is. There are at least two ways the Japanese subtitles might be interpreted. The first one is to view them as an incomplete sentence, leaving it up to the player to deduce from the context of the scene how the sentence might be supposed to end. This is, however, somewhat problematic, considering that we already know how it's supposed to end by looking at the writing on the wall. This is problematized even further by the fact that it's a bit difficult to reconcile the subtitles with the ultimate message, since you can't end it with a traditional Japanese word for farewell. Many of you might already know the word sayonara, meaning farewell or goodbye in Japanese, but you can't put sayonara or even something as informal as bye-bye here after this e. You could do it if the line ended on a ni instead, but it doesn't. The only word I could come up with that could fit this context was therefore the word sasageru, made famous by Shingeki no Kyojin, or Attack on Titan, meaning to offer something up. In this case, Wakka offering up his Blitzball career to the past. Another way to look at this would be to consider it a complete statement. In this case, Shounen no Kokoro no Omoide would mean just that, to the memories of my time as a young boy, as if Wakka was writing a letter to those memories. The problem with this, however, is that it would mean that the actual body of the message would be excluded, making it even harder to infer the intended message, since it doesn't actually say farewell. The funny thing is that the English subtitles, My best memories are here, seem to have been translated from the Japanese subtitles, explaining why the English line is different from the English line actually written on the wall. It is also a testimony to the extreme openness of the Japanese line, since the underlying premise, that of sending a message to the past, seems to have been lost in translation, the message only referencing the past as opposed to attempting to engage with it. The reason for this whole translation debacle is probably that the people responsible for the subtitles either didn't have the actual screenshot in front of them, or that they were unaware of the actual meaning behind what was written, being unable to read it themselves. The result is a split in the translation of the original message, wherein the Japanese version fails to fully convey the meaning of the original line, and the English translation in turn puts a different twist on a line than the Japanese originally translated from perfectly good English. All of these versions are perfectly serviceable in themselves, although the Japanese version might be a bit bare-boned. What matters is that Wakka was able to immortalize his message for future generations of Blitzball players by writing it on the wall in the famous Blitzball Stadium in Lucca, with what looks like chalk.
This is what happens when I let him talk without interrupting. Well, hopefully it turns out alright. If you feel it turned out alright, please subscribe. And hit that like button. There's also a bell.
Birds out.